Welcome to Misinformational, and thank you for joining our very first podcast. I'm Rebekah Jones, and I'll be your host as we wade through the mis, dis, and malinformation in the press and on the web, dissecting and dismantling online smut, smears, and seditious propaganda for America's ascendant autocrats. Tonight, I will be joined by Dr. Cindy Banyai, who's a professor at Florida Gulf Coast University and two-time candidate for Congress out of the Fort Myers area. Our topic of discussion this evening is to introduce you to our program, to me, to Cindy, what we're going to be talking about, and introduce you to the concept of information warfare. What is it and how does it work? By using a few examples from my own experience of what information warfare looks like in practice. And we'll cover the basics and introduce you to our viral misinformation story of the week.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Thanks for having me here, Rebekah, and joining on this amazing journey of uncovering all this insane stuff that's happening in Florida and across the world, really, when it comes to information and how we gather that information. And I know that we wanted to dive into how we're going to talk about this today, but I think the best starting point is to have you answer for us what is the difference between misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah, so we use the terms misinformation and disinformation interchangeably a lot. There is a difference. The difference is basically that misinformation is information that is false, but that is spread without the person who's using it knowing that it's false. So if your uncle sees some kind of meme about a recent story and he thinks that it's outrageous and he wants everybody to know about it and it's false, that's misinformation. He's providing information that he believes to be legitimate to other people that is false. Disinformation is the generation of that content. It is when you intentionally produce false information to mislead people, to cause civil discord or divisiveness and share it across the internet. So intent, like the entire legal system of the United States, is really what makes the difference there. It's, did you know it was false and you spread it to achieve a certain goal or political benefit or economic or whatever it is? Or did you not know? Did you not realize? So a lot of the stuff that you would see on the internet, specifically about COVID, was misinformation. Someone would make a chart somewhere that said that the majority of people who were getting sick with COVID are vaccinated. Take something out of context. And oftentimes these things really do have a grain of truth to them, which makes them harder to pull apart from the fiction. If you can verify any aspect of one of these things, then people think the rest of it must be true. That's one of the ways that they trick you. So the person who made that was committing disinformation. That's what they did. They took something that was misleading or false and spread it for the intent of causing fear or confusion. The person who shared it, who does not know, is misinformation. So crazy uncle sharing memes, misinformation. The SOBs behind it, disinformation.
Got it. So that's what I was just going to say. So it is Uncle Jerry sharing that. It's just, he's just kind of a cog in the wheel of this, right? He's just sharing information. He probably confirms his already existing opinion, so he's likely to share it, and that's misinformation. But whoever made that meme to share made
assuming they knew it was false, but most oftentimes a lot of this content comes from content farms. And of course they have very prolific anti-American troll farms and meme farms that generate content, like in the 2016 election, when something ridiculous like 30 million people were sharing Russian misinformation on Facebook. So when they created it, they knew it was false. When people shared it, they didn't.
Where are these meme farms, this disinformation farms?
They're everywhere. There's a very oftentimes decentralized system in place. If we think about this in the terms of network analysis, they can coordinate with each other, but a lot of the time that's just haphazard. They just happen to fall upon each other, have shared interests or shared goals. And so they'll promote each other's content. But we, of course, had in 2016 a large Russian interference in our election, which a lot of people still to this day believe never happened. That's an example of disinformation, is people being told that there was no interference in the 2016 election, when investigation after investigation, multiple indictments, all of this proved that it was. But those people generating that did so for the sole purpose of targeting and misleading people based on their own psychological profiles. This is what Cambridge Analytica did and got in a lot of trouble for. And that was a incredibly intelligent micro-targeting method to a lot of the people that were targeted were Black or Latino to make them distrust Democrats and sharing false stories, planning false stories, and sowing discord. And Russia is a big source of a lot of it. They pretty much just enjoy anything that causes division within America, the destabilization of democracy and the complete dissolution of truth. And so they're one of the biggest generators. But of course, we do have our very own. And I'm sure that as soon as this is posted on Twitter, they will be coming out in droves to share misinformation. And we have
already Big Mouth Media, this is the brand new media company here in Florida, the first media company in Florida to focus on progressive issues. They just launched their Twitter page and social media, trying to host podcasts like this one and other thought leaders in the progressive and democratic liberal space. But one of the things that has been very interesting is, as soon as you were mentioned, they come out of the woodwork, out of nowhere. It's been a phenomenon that I have witnessed for so long, going way back to the very first time that we heard of you, Rebekah. The very first time we heard of Rebekah Jones, it was all just so amazing. Like one mention in one tweet, and then you get hundreds of people you've never heard of talking trash and saying things.
And most of them are co-accounts. So they're multiple accounts that are operated by the same people. And it's not like the players at this point are unknown. Most of them have been unmasked. And the chief one is a white supremacist from Kokomo, Indiana, who's a radical nationalist, which was so disappointing to find out, honestly. I was like hoping it was somebody important and smart and like that this vile, nasty person is just a genius in hiding. It was just some loser from Kokomo, Indiana, 26 years old.
Some guy that's just
so boring.
Nothing else going on.
Yeah, it's quite impressive. All of my online activity is constantly being monitored. So without announcing it or even telling anyone outside of the participants of the Media Literacy Project PAC, I filed the pre-filing paperwork with the FEC. It didn't tell anybody about it. And before I think the official paperwork had gone through, they were already talking about it. So if my name pops up on an online database, they know about it. If I comment on something, they know about it, and they'll retweet it. I am a great job creator for troll farms. These people have
you're a job creator. How amazing. Yeah, that's true. Right? We're tweeting about the Media Literacy Project, which at that point you and I you told me that you were involved in it. Yeah, these folks who were trolling you on Twitter, even though you're not even on Twitter, they're trolling you. They were talking about that project. Yeah. And I was
Yeah, you actually brought that up to my attention. And the funniest part about all of it is because it's pathetic in multiple ways. Because I don't check that stuff. I never did. I never paid attention to that stuff when I was on Twitter. So whatever they think they're eating at, I don't care. You can keep posting all you want. And of course, we've reported this, and a lot of these people are under investigation. And I'm just going to let that happen and sit back and enjoy a rum and Coke whenever it goes down. But back to our topic. Yeah, I know it's a bit of an academic discussion that we're trying to have that's accessible to everybody. But it's complicated, and we don't typically think of people like trolls on Twitter as information warfare, but it is. It's strategically designed to be that way. And one of the ways to conceptualize this is about who the opponent or the adversary is, because information warfare is principally designed as false or misleading information designed to confuse or disorient an enemy. Now, it might seem based on the online activity targeting me that I'm the target, I'm the adversary, but I'm not. I'm just a tool. The actual target and adversary is the democratic process, truth, anybody who might be in opposition to Ron DeSantis, people who are in large opposition to people who promoted COVID-19 vaccines. I ended up on that crap list. So I'm not actually the target. I'm just the example that they're using to target their actual target. And it's highly effective. But it's like network-centric warfare. So in new media worlds, that means like there are these bubbles that exist, and they all cooperate with each other. Now, Jim Stewartson and Stephen Jarvis have done a lot of work tracking some of this down. Jim Stewartson is the guy who made the QAnon documentary that kind of looked to correct some of the misinformation in the HBO documentary about who was really behind QAnon. Principally Joseph Flynn, who is Mike Flynn's brother, which was hinted at in the documentary in HBO, but not fully explored. But he knows this stuff front, back, sideways, every possible way. And the people who are responsible for trolling me, who of course feign loyalty to the Democratic Party and to progressive principles, they're like, oh, I'm a Democrat too, because we are more receptive to their ideas and their, let's say, their disinformation if we believe they're one of us. They're one of the tribe. Oh, this is a Democrat saying that? I don't know. Maybe I should read it. It is one of the oldest tricks in the book. It's feigned like allegiance to gain your trust and to make you feel more comfortable and to actually give what bullshit they're saying a chance. It's the same kind of tools that were developed in Russia more than 100 years ago. They have a word for it, and I don't think I'm going to say it, but it's the concept of Maskarovka. Okay. Oh my God. We're going to have to cut this out and make sure I get it right. Maskarovka. I don't know. It's a Russian word.
Maskarova?
It's something like that. It basically means, it directly translates to camouflage, but it doesn't mean that in the spotted colors. It's about making your information so present and invasive and aggressive that it blends in with all the other stuff. It's a far more highly sophisticated way of targeting with disinformation campaigns than just like, I'm going to make some stuff up and just share it on my blog. One of the biggest aspects of this that's been deployed and is probably the most concerning recently is media control and manipulation. Yeah, let's go to page 2.
So I think what's really so fascinating about all this as well is that this has been happening, and there are some people who are involved in it that are very directed and involved in this. And I think that's the difference between what Americans think is happening versus what's actually happening. A lot of people think that this is the truth, and these are grassroots researchers figuring out things and sharing information.
Or
and
independent
it's like,
journalists.
right, yeah. Sorry, grassroots is a very Democrat type of word, isn't it? But yeah, independent researchers, the ones that pull themselves up by the bootstraps or whatever. Those researchers, and they figured out this information. And it's almost an insult to Americans if you say that, hey, you're actually being targeted as somebody who will like take in this information
to that kind of stuff.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, and the tactics are like tried and true. We give Goebbels a lot of credit for perfecting the propaganda playbook under the Nazis, but the fact is that the same types of tactics have been used in warfare for all of history. Redirection, subversion, these are all kinds of just standard, this is what people did. You'll find propaganda in ancient Greece, and it's not new. We just have a new media environment that makes it's very lucrative for some of these people.
Yeah.
And it's also a lot more intense and dense. So it's everywhere and anybody can access it. Like if you didn't go see the little propaganda movies that played in theaters in World War I, you were less likely to consume that information than if you went. And that's not so much the case when, especially it's everyone on social media, but even more so in the media. So the strategy is actually most effective when it includes shades of information that's actually true. Like I said before, if you can fact check just one thing and it comes out true, then people are more likely to say, well, that was true. Are you saying the rest of this is? Yeah.
Maybe this other stuff is true too.
So there's a a good example of that from a personal experience is there's this former columnist from Politico who has had it out for me since December of 2020 when I called him sexist for being sexist. And he's probably the most mainstream of the DeSantis propagandists. And he also does it for Matt Gaetz as well, but mostly for DeSantis. And his name is Mark Caputo, and he's got a long track record of promoting conspiracy theories and false information, working on behalf of the Republican Party. My buddy Dan Ulfelder, who founded Remove Ron and ran for Attorney General, thinks that they have some kind of PP tape on him or something that he does this work. Some kind of blackmail or dirt, I don't know. But he's been engaged in information warfare against Americans long before my story came out. He was involved with the BP oil spill, basically doing their PR. He's been pushed out of pretty much every outlet he's ever worked at, and it's a pretty good example of falling upwards. And
which white men affiliated with Republicans happen to do in droves.
Yeah, especially in the media. So outside of disinformation about me, which for him included planting false stories in the news and in the media, tampering with documents before their release, leaking or publishing government or private docs on behalf of the government or its agents. Those are the textbook types of media plants that are defined by the Center for Strategic and International Studies that reviews misinformation and information warfare. Those are the three media agents that you'll find, the things that they do. And he's done all three. But he's been posting pro DeSantis propaganda under the guise of opinion columns, all kinds of really shoddy stuff. And then, of course, there's the scandal with the Capitalist. So a while back, there was a journalist who was investigating Florida Power and Light and was exposing them in some pretty harmful ways to their company and their brand. There was this kind of online blog rag called The Capitalist, which was founded by this guy who did communications for Rick Scott. And he and Florida and Power Light coordinated to attack this journalist constantly, and anyone really who spoke ill of Florida Power and Light. Mary Ellen Klaus at the Miami Herald was one of the targets because she often wrote negatively about Florida Power and Light or other conservative groups. Leaked communications between these people, this is crazy, showed that the founder, I think his name was Burgess, I didn't write it down, floated the idea of these are her taking over well-established papers like Florida Today and the Gannett Network, which includes here the Pensacola News Journal.
And down here in Fort Myers, that's Naples Daily News and News Press.
Yeah.
And that's pretty big.
Yeah, so they wanted to take over these well-established papers and turn them into what he called ghost operations. So these are reporters that they would pay on top of their whatever they're getting at the paper, which frankly is not much. So this would make it incredibly tempting to plant stories and to write stories that were favorable to these companies on top of as part of their job. They'd basically be bribing reporters. He asked for $2 million. And the two reporters that he suggested that he wanted to bring on immediately, implying that they were already on board, and he obviously knew these guys very quick, but well, were Mark Caputo and Gary Fine. Gary Fineout is also at Politico, and I've had interactions with, but those were the two that he wanted $2 million to plant stories that are favorable to them and their agenda, including other conservatives. And they would continue to attack real journalists who were exposing corruption. Yeah, that's called ghost operations. And it absolutely happens. It is one of the most disturbing parts of information warfare, because it means that we have reporters, even in mainstream media, who are there and being paid by people like Florida Power and Light to destroy any negative stories that might be in the newsroom about remote fluff pieces, to target people, individuals or companies who question them or try to expose them for what they're doing. And Mark Caputo is one of those people.
Yeah. What's really interesting is I know both you and I ran in districts that are very red districts, right? And for years here, I would see in our media, right? It would always, again, those fluff pieces that you were saying. It's, oh, this guy's great. And look at his background, his history. And we just had a guy that was like a baseball player elected to county commission. And it's like, nobody talks about all of the misdeeds that these folks have done or any of the critical things, looking at them with a critical eye, right?
Yeah.
It was all this. And it's for years before I got into politics, I was just a mom and a citizen and an instructor and running my business. And I would watch and I would say, no one here ever says anything negative about any of these people
Yeah.
ever. And that was both the print and the action media, the news, and actually we have Waterman and the other one that gets all their stuff handed down from corporate. I can't remember their name right now.
Yeah.
But they actually combined together. And I kept talking with people about this and they would be like, "Oh no, it's just not a thing," or "They're just really nice guys." I'm like, "No, I'm listen. In my district alone, my opponent has like multiple felons that literally disappeared. He's like multiple felonies. Nobody's questioned him on that. We have a guy on the Bonita Springs City Council who killed a woman on I-75 after verifiably attending a Republican drinking party fundraiser.
Yeah.
Nobody says anything about him, and just on and on. And it's like, if we were really in a place where the media was not being controlled in some way or shape or form by these powerful interests, then these guys, they wouldn't stand a chance. Everybody would look at them and know that they're a joke, but we don't have that here. And so I
Yeah.
think that really us here in Florida, in these different places too, we're on the forefront of what could actually take over in a lot of other places across the United States if we're not careful.
Yeah. And this is something that's been ongoing as small town newspapers have been dying or have been bought out over the decades. Really, they can't sustain themselves independently, so they get sold to organizations like GAN, and then it's a more centralized system. Now, I enjoy Florida Today. I've never had a bad experience with any reporters from Florida Today, but I do know that from the friends that I have that have worked there, that the pay is abysmal. And if you're working at the Pensacola News Journal and you're making horrible amounts of money and you don't really care about what you're doing, and then somebody like this comes along and says, "We will give you $25,000 a year to publish the stories that we want you to publish, or to kill the ones that we don't want you to do." And it's not even necessarily content control. It can also be access. So it is really difficult not to write about all the things that I was doing over here. You have a Forbes Tech Person of the Year, Fortune 40 under 40, Ron DeSantis's, according to the Daily Beast, worst nightmare. And to just not write. When Florida Power and Light screwed over everybody, when the official takeover from Gulf Power happened and they jacked up their rates, I was paying people's light bills. And I've donated a lot of money to a lot of organizations around here, made a lot of this stuff happen. And the worst part about it is they cover some of the stuff I did, but would not ever mention me. They would cover the Challenge 22 fundraiser where they raised $30,000. 10,000 of that was from me. I was 1/3 of that money. And my
I
name was never mentioned.
I thought it was just me. They did the same thing to me here. They would be at events that I organized, and
Yeah.
not to mention they won't put me on camera. They would actually be instructed to not put me in camera, not put my name. So that's fascinating. That's kind of part of this media
Media.
manipulation.
And one specific story, Matt Gaetz is a piece of shit and he's full of shit. But when they arrested the man who threatened to kill him and everything, I got a lot of heat from Democrats for coming out and saying, no person should have that happen to them. As somebody who's been receiving death threats every single day since DeSantis outed me to the world, that's not something that we should accept as part of being in Congress or a part of any public service job.
Right.
But when one of his guys called and said they were going to kill me, they were going to kill my whole family, I was going to die, motherfucker, and on a voicemail without blocking their number, and then proceeded to text my husband for several days with threatening messages, and we reported it to the FBI. Nobody would cover that story. We had the voicemail, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know if we can splice it in here or not, but it's pretty frightening, and nobody cared. And I had to apply for a restraining order for Matt Gaetz, one of his lead goons, to protect my son, my 12-year-old son, was being stalked and photographed and bullied online by Matt Gaetz. And nobody wanted to write about that. But you have to actively try to do that bad of a job in the media, because most people, I hear something, maybe I just have high standards. Maybe I am disappointed in the media experience, having gone to the best journalism school in the country for my undergrad, as DeSantis so kindly pointed out back in May of 2020. But because I'm not a scientist, I'm a journalist. I was a double major. The science one didn't count, I guess. Only journalism counted. That I believed in the principles that I was taught, and that speaking truth to power and exposing wrongs and writing about things that matter to real people in the real world was what you should strive to do. And that's not true everywhere, but in Florida especially, that's not what's happening. Ron DeSantis might be one of the most effective people at disseminating propaganda through mainstream media networks. And that's terrifying. And it's really disappointing to see that only now are the press kind of awake to how dangerous that is, because it's been a long time. But yeah, that could bring a good segue into our misinformation story of the week.
All right, the misinformation story of the week.
We should have a banner come up like whoosh, misinformation story of the week.
Oh yeah, because so one of the things that I know that you had talked about is like you want this to be like a regular segment, right?
Like every single week, we're gonna look at a couple of viral stories. We're only gonna cover one during our podcast, and then if we have time, we'll do some other ones as extras that can go online. But we're gonna look specifically at something that was a big story that is representative of kind of the information warfare that we discuss every week on this podcast. And so each week we'll highlight a big story from the last week that spun out of reality, spread false information, caused harm to people, institutions, agencies, companies, any kind of entity, and then break down who the culprits are, how it got started, and what the truth behind the disinformation campaign really means.
All right, awesome. Let's go.
So for this week's drum roll, we are talking about the Twitter files mania, which it would be impossible for you to ignore because of how many stories have been planted about it, especially in the conservative press, but more so bleeding into the mainstream press. And of course, the myth of liberal big tech suppressing conservative ideas is a form of a form of information warfare in and of itself. It creates distrust of all slightly opposing views shared on social media to further discord in American conversation. If you don't agree with it, then it's big tech lying to you. If somebody on Breitbart told you, but you don't see it in mainstream social media sharing, it's because they're blocking it. And that makes everything corruptible. Now, the narrative being force-fed to conservatives on the information warfare circuit right now is that Elon Musk, who recently bought Twitter, has revealed some kind of malfeasance by Twitter employees at a large scale targeting conservative voices or covering up stories about Hunter Biden or any number of crazy spin-offs from it. Of course, that is a gross mischaracterization of the very selective documents that Twitter has provided via tweet only by this guy, Matt Taibbi. I don't know if I'm saying his name right.
You are.
Taibbi, is that right?
Matt
Okay.
Taibbi, yes. He was
Okay.
the former Rolling Stones reporter, journalist. He's got a very interesting
He
past.
does. So, if you haven't asked, who is this guy and why did Elon decide to go through him? Both of those are necessary questions with really crazy answers. So, based on the amount of time that we wasted on this guy's background, which felt like the dictionary definition of privilege, and we all needed to take showers afterwards. Taibbi was a basketball player in Uzbekistan in the early 90s. That's where the story starts. He got deported from Uzbekistan, though, and then went to play basketball in Mongolia at a whopping $100 a month. Then he lived in Russia a while and started a biweekly tabloid considered so vile, so misogynistic, so false, and even cruel that the only American outlet willing to publish anything that he wrote was Playboy. He also claims that he became addicted to heroin at this point. And so, after coming back to the United States, after spending 20 years or so doing in his stints playing basketball, writing for a salacious tabloid, and doing heroin in Eastern Europe, he couldn't hold a position and started writing guest columns for a bunch of kind of fringe or developing outlets until someone, for some unknown reason, decided to invite him to be a political columnist at Rolling Stone. Yeah, lots of respect for Rolling Stone lost just right there. They actually axed him a year later for writing what he claimed was a satirical post about murdering the Pope. He even got the editor fired there for publishing it, which good riddance. So even though he was a guest political columnist for about a year, he still touts that he ever managed to land a full-time gig with Rolling Stone on all of his profiles on social media. And as you just said, he's the former Rolling Stone person.
Right.
For 1 year, more than 15 years ago, this dude did a guest column regularly and still puts that shit on his profile, which is pathetic. Then he suddenly after he got fired from Rolling Stone, he suddenly started getting spots on Rachel Maddow, on Keith Olbermann, on Democracy Now!, very respectable liberal places. And then he started resuming his kind of infrequent column for Rolling Stone's online magazine. And things changed in 2016. So, not that this guy ever seemed to be a normal person. He went full QAnon, defending Trump, falsely claiming repeatedly that there was no Russian interference in the 2016 election, which of course there was. Now, I realize that statement in and of itself is going to spur a lot of comments saying that that's not true. It is true. If you're watching this right now, there was widespread interference in the 2016 election by Russia, most of which was concerned with information warfare. There have been 17 indictments of Russian nationals regarding this thing. They are in prison. This happened. But at any rate, aside from that, he then went further and attacked Alexander Vindman, the whistleblower who exposed what was going on between Trump and his threats against Ukraine, which of course played into the eventual invasion of the nation and the slaughter of its civilians. Needless to say, he doesn't like whistleblowers. Truth, exposing corruption or anything good or decent. I'm probably already on a shit list, even though this was the first time I've ever heard his name. But that's the type of person whose shit list I'm proud to be on. As I mentioned, he still infrequently writes for Rolling Stone's online-only magazine. And his most recent post was from 4 months ago, and it was about the big pharma monster who was profiting off of COVID-19. The interesting part about this, because he's not wrong, he was completely right about that company. It's shady as hell. They were the people who made the medication that would treat all of the types of COVID pre-Delta. So what he was targeting was the company that gave DeSantis tons of money to push COVID-19 treatments that didn't work once Delta became the predominant virus. And they knew that. Everybody knew that. That was a huge controversy in the state of Florida. But Taibbi doesn't even mention it, not once. He's talking about how Big Pharma pushed these drugs and profited grossly off of it, even when they knew it wasn't working, and didn't once mention that the governor that was pushing this the most and did it far after the CDC and other states said this isn't effective anymore was Governor DeSantis. So
that's the one that he put out where it was like you could go to the place and they would give you the treatment intravenously.
Yes, it was like $12,000 a pop that they were charging the state, which seems like that would be an important thing because one of their highest profit margins was the state of Florida. Because fewer people that are vaccinated, the more people who are going to get sick and have a more severe illness and will need the treatment. Right. So it all feeds into itself. And so right now, the kind of alt-right media networks want you to think that this man is a journalist, and he is not. He's antithetical to journalistic principles and journalistic work. This whole Twitter files thing has been covered by Axios, who wrote an article recently who's saying why no one was biting on the Twitter file scam. Even the right-leaning Atlantic allowed columnists to warn the public that this isn't what people are saying it is, and it's being taken out of context. Though I don't have a whole lot of love for the conservative and often contrarian tone that the New York Times has taken in recent years, their piece on what they called a modern media maelstrom summed up all of this problem. So they are saying, on the right side, they're angry that the mainstream media isn't picking this story up, and they're making all of these salacious claims. So this is where I would like to kind of splice in some of our big media talking heads and the things that they have said. Okay. Tucker Carlson said that the Twitter files documents showed this is a quote, systemic violation of the First Amendment, the largest example of that in modern history. Pretty sure the raid on my home was a bigger violation of the First Amendment, but okay. It's not a First Amendment issue at all, because of course, those who understand the First Amendment know that the First Amendment protects you from expressing your opinion or beliefs, from being imprisoned or charged with crimes. It does not protect you from social consequences. It doesn't extend to companies beyond people expressing religious beliefs, things like that.
Unless you're a protected class. It's not the government. And that's the whole thing about why the Twitter First Amendment debate is so stupid, is because Twitter is a private company, and even more private than now that Elon Musk has taken it off of the market, so to speak, as well. So yeah, the private companies can have rules as long as they are not discriminating against a protected class, like you were saying. So
correct.
And assholes, by the way, are not a protected class.
There's an argument to say it's censorship, but there is no basis to call it a First Amendment violation. Now, I was banned off of Twitter in 2021, and this is Twitter's official statement for oversharing the link to the Miami Herald article that exposed everything that was going on at the Department of Health and proved everything in my whistleblower case true. That also happened to coincide the same weekend that Jack Dorsey was in Florida and visiting with certain staff of DeSantis's crew, and that the state stopped reporting all of its detailed data, all three strikes at once. So I would actually say, yes, I've been censored on Twitter, but I do not believe that's a First Amendment violation. There is a difference. But Carlson has, of course, promoting that it's a First Amendment violation. House Republicans...
He wouldn't know what the Constitution was if he slapped them right in the face.
No, they wouldn't. House Republicans claimed that the tweets that were released by Taibbi, because let's keep in mind, there was no data dump. There's no data access. He put it in a series of tweets. They chose exactly what they wanted to say and how they wanted to present it. But House Republicans claimed that these tweets showed collusion between Twitter and Biden administration members. But there's no evidence for that whatsoever. They just made it up. They made it up. In fact, like I said, there was no big data release at all. All Taibbi did was post tweets with screenshots and then wrote about them on his Substack. Selectively chosen messages, no transparency, no access. And when the New York Times and other legitimate news agencies asked for access to the original documents and data, they didn't get it. So there's nothing that's being done transparently here at all.
Wait, so what about the the outrage about not releasing the Hunter Biden dick pics?
Yeah. I don't think that Twitter currently allows dick pics at all. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't think we need to give Hunter Biden a special pass or anybody who wants to publish them, because you're not allowed to publish dick pics on Twitter. It is a violation. And so, yeah, there's a lot of Hunter Biden stuff, which have been a kind of a trope for some of the far right conservative people, including Matt Gaetz, for a while now. Of course,
They
Matt
love
Gaetz,
it.
yeah, they love it. And
They
because
love it. They eat
Matt
it up.
Gaetz is everything that Republicans wish Hunter Biden was. And so it's the ultimate irony that he's the one who's been this holding up dramatically in the middle of a C-SPAN interview. I have the hard drive. It's like, okay, release it. Okay, release it. You don't need permission. You've got it in your hand. Go ahead.
Right.
Release all that shit online. Let's see what's in there, Matty boy. No, they're not going to do that. They're trying to play
Because
it
it's
out
a
of
nothing burger. They know it's a nothing burger. They know the Hunter
and
Biden thing
they're
is a
also
Hunter
like shocked when they get a response from Democrats that say to them, okay, if he did something illegal, arrest him. Put him in jail.
Yeah. Take
We're
him.
not going to sit here and try to defend him.
Shut up.
What are you talking about? We hold our own accountable. So it's if he
Right.
did something illegal, he should go to jail. By the way,
Right.
Matt Gaetz, so should you guys
Yep.
can be cell buddies. Have your little jail cell together.
Him and Joel Greenberg.
Yeah. If he lives much longer.
Oof.
When even the propaganda presented doesn't say what the propagandists say it does,
Yeah.
you're full of shit. And it's no surprise that Musk, especially right now, is throwing a temper tantrum that no legitimate journalists will publish anything he wants them to without actual proof. Now, I'm not saying that shady things didn't happen at Twitter. My suspension is certainly very shady. And Elon Musk is going around saying, oh, we've restored everybody. Okay, but me. Sure.
Yeah,
that's
not
fine.
you. And I remember when that happened because I was following it, and all of a sudden they just booted you off, and it was really nothing was going on. Yeah, there was that story that was being shared, and it was like vindicating you and what had happened.
None of that.
And then all of a sudden, done. And it was very considering that folks that got thrown off Twitter are usually really,
Very
really crazy people saying very insane things,
threatening,
inciting violence. You're Laura Loomer, you got Trump. Gee, these folks got thrown off or suspended at some point because they were really doing things that were very out of line and violent oftentimes and very disruptive, or saying things that were patently untrue. And I can tell from being on Twitter now that floodgate is open. Like that,
yes.
it is a free for all. It is bot central. It is trolls. It is people saying nasty, horrible things all the time. And yeah, that whole check where they were actually trying to stop these people who were aggregating audiences that love the violence and the mayhem and sharing those disinformation pieces of propaganda out and around, right? Those are all there. They're all back and they're loving it. And it is awful that they haven't let you back, because that is how you can tell they're full of shit.
They were full of shit because they didn't even allow my campaign to tweet like when we were doing events or anything like that. As far as I have found so far, I was the only major party nominee running for Congress in the country who was not allowed to be on Twitter. Now, some of these races, the people aren't on Twitter. That does happen, believe it or not, especially in parts of rural America. But I was the only one who was not allowed a presence on Twitter.
Yep.
I actually spoke to a lawyer from Miami about a very interesting potential lawsuit to sue Twitter for not filing in-kind contributions to Matt Gaetz for providing him access, resources, and exposure that they denied to his political opponent. They're allowed to do that. They can endorse or promote whoever they want. They're a private company. But failing to report that information as in-kind contributions is a FEC violation.
It is.
My understanding is that with Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, Twitter cannot be held liable for the content that is shared in their program. But anything outside of that, their business practices and things like that, absolutely are subject to the rest of the laws. The idea of Section 230 was that, and this is, of course, pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook, this is in the Clinton era. Let's say you own a restaurant and there's a couple of mafia people who sit in the corner every day and plot murders. You can't be charged as a co-conspirator for the people who are eating in your restaurant and planning the murders unless you knew about it. Now, see, if you were overhearing those conversations, or God forbid you made suggestions or encouraged it, then yes, you can. Which is part of the reason why the Communications Decency Act of the 90s needs to be revisited. Because the intention was that you can't possibly know every single thing that's being done on a social media or a media platform, especially one as large as Twitter, which is true. But when you do have AI that's supposed to detect certain types of criminal activity, language, things like that, you do have a responsibility to make sure that it's not, your platform is not being used to plan or to attack or to basically commit any other kind of
like
violation.
let's say overthrow democracy and attack the Capitol on January 6th.
Or coordinate in highly efficient smear campaigns against scientists. So, which constitutes harassment and stalking. When they're made aware and they fail to act, that is a different kind of situation. But as Section 230 makes it, they're exempt. But business practices are not. And it's certainly interesting to see how fast Twitter's going down. It's also sad because it had been used as a free speech platform, especially in countries that did not allow for it. When we think about like the Arab Spring and back when I was in college and studying how Twitter allowed people an avenue outside of the state government regulating communications to coordinate and plan protests and to warn each other if something was unsafe. That was an important part of history, and it's been wrecked, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but
and I was gonna say, as I teach American government is one of the classes that I teach, and we were talking about the effect of these social media platforms on politics as an influence avenue as well. And I think that what people, right now in America, right, people are looking at what has happened on Facebook and Twitter, and they're being feeling some feelings about it, depending on however they feel related to Trump or whatever, right? But the thing that is actually really important to understand is that there has been criticism of these platforms predating that. Okay, so this is not just a partisan issue in the United States. I remember, almost a decade ago now, Facebook coming under heavy criticism for their allowance of anti-Rohingya Muslims propaganda being put out by the Burmese government, and how they were essentially fueling and allowing genocide to happen and allowing these messages to be spread. And that was a huge thing. But in the United States, a lot of Americans couldn't even find that on a map, let alone care about what was happening there. But this was a criticism that was going on for a long time. And the good news is that there was efforts, and there was congressional oversight, by the way, that started to call into question the practices of these companies to make sure that they were being held accountable for these activities going on their watch, essentially. So even if using your restaurant example, even if they didn't necessarily know, if you overheard it or had some way to know, it's still their responsibility to stop these terrible actions or curtail them to the best of their ability.
Or to, at a minimum, report. That's the bare bottom. Is like if you're serving these people and they're saying, oh, we're going to kill the Surgeon General next week, and you're aware of that knowledge and you don't report it to police, I think that you shouldn't be thrown in prison for the rest of your life, obviously, but because you could be afraid or whatever. But there is an obligation or some kind of moral and societal duty to not turn a blind eye to crime.
100%.
And unfortunately, in information warfare, the subject of our weekly podcast, social media companies in particular have been evading any responsibility for their role in that for their entire existence. And I actually am hoping that next week we'll have a very special guest on to talk about how the emerging platforms that are currently seeking to replace Twitter plan to deal with misinformation, with attack bots and psyop campaigns and all of that. So that'll be an interesting discussion on trying to understand how other platforms might do differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And fantastic. So that's all on our special segment here today, correct?
Yes, that is our misinformation story of the week. So
Wow. Yeah,
interesting
good.
characters to say the least. I'm always amazed like by some of these people's like background and stuff. It's when you start to look at them, it's like, why is anyone listening to this person? And it's quite insane how they've managed to accumulate this much of an audience despite very egregious things that they have done, and
Oh,
the
yeah.
people they've hurt, actual real people they've harmed.
Oh, I
And
remember when Joe Rogan was just a host of a TV show where people would eat scorpions or whatever. So why anybody listens to that guy either is sometimes a bit of a mystery.
I had no idea who he was until recently, until the whole like craziness of late came out. But yeah, that's somebody who I'm sure we'll have to revisit eventually.
There are so many characters that we're going to have to revisit. And that is actually what's going to be the brilliant part about this segment. Diving into what's going on in the misinformation story of the week and talking about the truth and just really deconstructing the misinformation and the disinformation providers that we see going on here. And this is the whole misinformational approach.
Yep, it's information warfare, and it's about time that we started arming ourselves.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy to be here with your first podcast. We are going to see Misinformational once a week, getting things going, brought to you by Big Mouth Media. And there's lots of opportunities to get and see more of misinformational content. This is a growing opportunity to hear, learn more about the misinformation going on around us.
Yep. And if you have a story that you want us to cover for our weekly misinformational dissection, you can email it to info@misinformational.com.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for joining us here today.
It was
And we'll
my
see
pleasure.
you next time.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.